We have started the stream, so you can go on.
Okay. So you're all welcome to this start of the webinar series, Unpacking Trauma, Transitional Justice, Trauma Healing in Eastern Africa and the Horn. This is a collaboration between Caues University College, School of Social Sciences, Interreligious Dialogue and Islamic Studies, IRDIS, and our partners, the Center for Transitional Justice and Trauma Healing, the Puntland State University. We welcome you to this webinar series, and we would like to kick off by inviting the Vice Chancellor, Deputy Vice Chancellor for Academics, Caues University College, to welcome you to this webinar series. Then we'll make a few more announcements. Welcome, Sister Dr. Agnes Njeri.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nalugana.
Sister, you're welcome to welcome
Thank
us.
you. Can you hear me? I want to beef my internet. Am I stable now?
Yes, we hear you.
Thank you. I want to greet you all. Those of us who are in Africa, good evening. Those of us who are out of Africa, good morning. And I am here to represent Professor David Wangombe, the Vice Chancellor Designate of Caues University College. And I'm delighted to introduce this series of webinars hosted by Caues University College in collaboration with Professor Jordan Isse, Professor Emeritus of the School of Management of the University of Buffalo, New York City. Professor, we are delighted to have you around. I've seen you once, and I know what you're doing is good work in collaboration with the Caues University College. In the two units of the University College of Tangaza, that is the School of Arts and Social Sciences and the Institute of Interreligious Dialogue and Islamic Studies, have come together to embrace this initiative of Professor Jordan. He is the founder of the Transitional Justice and Trauma Healing Center in Puntland State University. The meeting of Professor Jordan with those two units and with Caues University College, I remember you met with our Professor David Wangombe, you have his blessing, has been a joyful recognition of shared values and commitments. In Tangaza, we endeavor to prepare ethical and transformational servant leaders for the church and society by providing quality education, research, and community engagement within the Catholic tradition of inclusiveness and dialogue. We hope to graduate students who are committed to justice and peace. The initiative to do research and share knowledge on transitional justice and trauma healing in this region will serve to make our mission more aligned to the realities of people who live in this region. And we know this region has been challenged with so much clashes. So we really need social justice and trauma healing. The aim of this webinar series is to address an existing research, also to encourage further research in this regard. With this webinar series, the parties want to target a wider audience in terms of students, researchers, but also policymakers, and the interested public about the nexus of transitional justice and trauma healing, with a regional focus on Eastern Africa and the Horn of Africa. Now, on behalf of Professor Wangombe, the Vice Chancellor Designate of Caues University College, I allowed this initiative and pledge to support it. And you have the blessing from Professor, because he's the one who dedicated me to come and talk on his behalf. We applaud the courage and tenacity of Professor Jordan in keeping the conversation of this work alive. And thank you so much, Professor, for choosing Caues as a partner. It is a work that is greatly needed and whose time is right. We thank the organizers of the webinar, especially the IRDIS, Institute of Interreligious Dialogue and Islamic Studies, and the School of Arts and Social Sciences. And I welcome all the participants and hope that we will all find paths of growing this initiative in your different places for the sake of a better world of all. I want to thank you once again, and let us have a great exchange of ideas as we start this webinar, and as we let us open our hearts and open our minds to share more and see how we can benefit from these webinars. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Asanteni, and have a blessed time.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sister Dr. Agnes, the Deputy Vice Chancellor of Tangaza University College, and for the wonderful welcome and very heartwarming words. I'd like now to invite IRDIS to give us the opening remarks. Father, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nanugala. Thank you very much. Greetings to all our participants of this series of webinar. IRDIS, the Institute for Interreligious Dialogue and Islamic Studies of Tangaza University College here in Nairobi, welcomes you all to this webinar. It's an institute that is an initiative of the Society of the Missionaries of Africa, known as White Fathers. That's our common name. And then it's also the initiative of the Tangaza University College. The Missionaries of Africa and Tangaza University College have been always thinking of that institute for long, and it has just been launched in November 2019. It's the fruit of a deep collaboration between the Missionaries of Africa and their partner, Agiamondo, committed to peace service. And they have been a great support and instrumental to the creation and actualization of that idea that was born of the Missionaries of Africa and Tangaza University College. Thanks to their specialized assistance, we have become now an institute and officially launched since 2019 in November. Our institute is very happy to collaborate with the School of Art and Social Sciences and Professor Hudan for this very interesting series of webinars. That first is an opportunity for us, IRDIS, to be in line with, in collaboration, and actually be who we are and want to be, to have a specialized approach that is interdisciplinary. An interdisciplinary approach to our mission as IRDIS. For our mission, joined actually with this series of webinars, our mission is the promotion of interreligious dialogue for peace, social cohesion, and sustainable development and peace, actually. And in this series of webinars dedicated to trauma and trauma healing and transitional justice, we find ourselves at the real path that we want. That is using and promoting interreligious dialogue to pave way to prevent and to deal and heal the traumas of our times. We know, of course, that nowadays our world is really going through tough times. These are hard times for us all over, especially in Africa, our domain in this series of webinars. And then our contribution as an institute is to bring our expertise in the domain of interreligious dialogue, and with the help of our partners, Agiamondo, to bring in the expertise in peace building, working together in an interdisciplinary approach to helping curb all those traumas that are going through in our world, caused by religion, caused by other means, land, and so on. All that cause trauma. And then we offer interreligious dialogue as a means to lead us into prevention of this trauma, prevention of these pains of our times, and help in the healing process through interreligious dialogue and dialogue in general, indeed. So in the name of and on behalf of all my brothers who are in the leadership of the Institute for Interreligious Dialogue and Islamic Studies, on behalf of Father Innocent Maganya, his director. I would like to wish a good webinar to all the participants, and to Dr. Hodan, blessings upon her from the Lord, so that she may lead us and help all participants draw the best out of this series, and wishing the best to you all. God bless you.
Thank you, Father Adrian Sawadogo, the program leader of IRDIS, Interreligious Dialogue and Islamic Studies. Now I'd like to call upon the Dean of School of Social Sciences, Dr. Idel Churu, to address us. Dr. Idel, welcome.
Thank you. It gives me great pleasure to welcome all the attendees, including my fellow organizers of this first webinar, in the conversation of the Transitional Justice and Trauma Healing Initiative. My name is Beatrice Churu, and I serve in Tangaza University College as Dean of the School of Arts and Social Sciences. All the programs in our school are focused on helping our educational community to be attuned to the needs of our people and to appreciate as well as cultivate the resources necessary to enable adequate responses to these needs. The conversations we engage in these webinars fit perfectly in this larger mission. One of the reasons we are here today is that we have heard the cry of our traumatized populations in this region of the continent of Africa. From our different religious and professional backgrounds, we try to do something to alleviate the suffering. Yet increasingly we discover how futile it is to operate in silos, religiously, professionally, or in any other way. In some cases, those silos can complicate rather than solve the problems we seek to address. We must not underestimate the religious, cultural, and gender basis for systematic injustices in the region. We must come together across the divides. Together, we have hope of achieving some lasting and wholesome positive results. We bring together our different experiences and validate them. We bring together our different understandings and use them to create a fuller picture in order to arrive at ever more correct diagnosis of the injustices that plague us and ever better recognition and application of the resources available to heal the trauma incurred by different individuals and groups among our people. In Tangaza, we believe that teaching minds and touching hearts is a powerful way to prepare young people to impact transformation in communities. Tonight, or today, depending on where you are in the world, we have a model of what we hope that all of us can become: sensitive to new needs, courageous to imagine a different reality, and willing to galvanize the resources of research and scholarship towards seeking effective and lasting solutions. And so on behalf of the Tangaza University College School of Arts and Social Sciences, I extend special thanks to Professor Hodan Isse for being that model, a visionary and efficacious leader. Because of your vision and hard work, Professor Hodan, in collaboration with like-minded people and institutions, I have in mind, for example, Fozia Abdikadir Dahir of Ottawa, Canada, and other universities in the region, including Puntland. This conversation about transitional justice and trauma healing in the Eastern African region and the Horn is gaining traction, and strategic partnerships are being forged, raising much hope. And in this context, I want to thank also the Institute for Interreligious Dialogue and Islamic Studies in Tangaza for being a strong partner in this and other initiatives, and for bringing your expertise in interreligious dialogue to bear upon this important work. Margaret Mead is famously quoted to have said that never doubt that a small group of thoughtful and committed citizens can change the world. And I believe that in this work on transitional justice and trauma healing, that is still in its nascent stage, we have the potential to change the plight of some of the pain-filled people of the region. If indeed we stay thoughtful, committed, and organized, we shall make a difference, and it shall be worth all the hard work that we must put in. I therefore welcome all of you to participate actively, listening and lively in conversation. We have the best speaker to open out for us the space and the questions. Everyone is invited to bring your perspectives, your questions, and your proposals. Together, across the divides, we can support the healing of our traumatized communities. Therefore, I thank you and welcome you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Beatrice Churu, the Dean of School of Arts and Social Sciences, Tangaza University College, for those warm words. Now we're moving to the main lecture, which is going to be given by the main speaker. But before that, I want to encourage you to put any questions you have in the chat so that we can answer them at the end. The speaker is going to take about 30 to 40 minutes, after which we shall interact with your questions. So it's now my pleasure to introduce to you Professor Ise Hodan. Professor Ise Hodan is the founder of Center for Transitional Justice and Trauma Healing at the Puntland State University. Professor of Emeritus, University of Buffalo School of Management. Professor Hodan is the initiator of this webinar series, and we're very happy to welcome Professor to share with us your thoughts on transitional justice, trauma healing. Welcome, Professor.
You can hear me. I'm
Yes.
also very grateful and delighted to be part of this webinar organized by myself and Tangaza University. It is actually a great opportunity, something that was always my passion, to bring this home, Africa, particularly East Africa, to in fact think about transitional justice, trauma identification, because what we see mostly is a lot of mental distress and trauma, and sometimes we don't even know, we don't even realize how bad that is. I wanted to start with the quote that, according to Nelson Mandela, peace is not only absence of conflict, peace is creation of an environment where all can flourish, regardless of race, color, creed, religion, gender, class, or caste. So this is our own people who have actually come up with these things. So with that, I will start with my presentation. The first thing you see, actually, I was wondering, how will I explain trauma? When we first start talking about trauma and transitional justice, me and my friend Fawzia Abdul Qadir, we actually spent maybe 3-4 years thinking about it. Everything we saw was trauma, but then you will see why so much mental distress, civil war, death, destruction of life and property. So in order for us to really understand this, and I'm not talking about natural disasters or natural trauma that's caused by natural disasters, we're talking about the man-made trauma. So to understand trauma, first I showed pictures, unfortunately very sad pictures to see, but when you look at it really, in our region, at times this is the reality. Parents, trying to save their children, women crying, refugee camps. So for you to understand trauma, and this is for everybody, because trauma, you see somebody, maybe an ambulance, you might think, what is trauma? Medical trauma. We're talking about social trauma. And you can see this is what trauma is. What distresses people, causes depression, causes internal displacement, refugee, and that could come from many sources, but eventually we'll get to it. Let me just try to make sure you understand what I meant by trauma in that sense. Who bears the brunt of war? You can see mostly it's youth and children, but you can see the plight of our people. Africa and the leaders of Africa and its population must really come to grips with the reality and wake up to the reality of persecution, of war, of conflict, of power grip, of all sorts of things that cause human tragedy. This is the tragedy that's really caused by man-made. If you look at it, most of these, as if you see the first one of it, makeshift refugee camps. You see a lot of women in line to get food. You see people who are walking just to run away from. Some of the election impasse in Somalia, it just happened in April 2020. Another one you can see here is Kenya and Somalia fighting over drugs called qat. We are neighbors, we are same people. We have, in fact, Somalia is very grateful to Kenya and what it did, but there are issues that are beyond, and that actually can become more problematic for people, because the issue of qat, we know, and this is, I'm very passionate about this, because we could grow our fertile land to food. Most of Africa or this region are food insecure. But when I see whether Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, most of us, we produce goods that's exported outside the country just for hard currency. When in fact we are getting food aid, we are getting lots of things that we importing from outside. One of the things that I'm very passionate about stopping is drugs, especially that are grown in our actually soil where we can grow food. In fact, what you see is the current dilemma between Somalia and Kenya, even though it's much more complex, to innocent mind, some of it revolves around the qat, who could bring qat to Somalia or whatever that is. And we could actually think about other issues that can, so when we talk about trauma and conflict, we have to really look at the root causes of it. Sometimes if you really deeply look at it, what you see is maybe there might be a paradigm shift. Maybe we can think about how we can all come together and prevent this plight and the mass traumatization. I'm not sure if you see the boat and how many people from East Africa, you call it Eritrea, Somalia, Ethiopia, Kenya, you name it, you see a lot of youth out there that are running away from their home country because this unemployment is so high, unprecedentedly high, and they try to look opportunity by going to Libya and all this so they can go to the West. But what did they find? They find torture and death in the high seas. This is a mass trauma that we need to think about it, identify it, understand it, and come up with solutions. I try to see that it's not only Somalia, which is a failed state and has been in a civil war for more than 30 years, but also you see the recent violence in Ethiopia. You can see South Sudan. I actually wanted to since we're in here in Kenya, Kenya is not bad, but comparatively in East Africa, it's more stable. But also remember the violence in 2007, Kenya post-election violence, the trauma, the displacement. I read somewhere 18 million people were displaced. So we cannot underestimate whether it's a political election impasse, whether it's civil war, whether it's a resource issue, whether it's territorial issue, the massive trauma remains. And it's not actually accountable to most people, especially our policymakers. And even international communities, I think they have to come to terms with these realities. Eventually, this is our human capital, okay? That are suffering and struggling not only to get employment, but also livelihoods. I was showing the picture of a child who is on one hand a victim because he's a child, he has a weapon, and he could have a weapon of mass destruction. He can also be a perpetrator because he's killing and he has no idea. So these are all pictures, and the next slide in fact shows our region. The reason I'm trying to show this picture is really think about the history on each one of these. Of course, all these states or countries are not equal. Some are more peaceful. Some are more democratic, at least fighting for democratic systems and institutions. But when it comes to violence and mass, one way or the other, maybe a decade ago, maybe now, something they have all in common. Of course, violence is not all the same. Somalia is the worst, but there are regions now that are joining the mass traumatization, and I will talk about why so much trauma in the region. First of all, I want to explain the complexity and the consequences of mass traumatization in Africa and the Horn. If you look at the research this topic, which is really the whole goal of this is to create a center for knowledge production and research our own problems. You know, you can always have top-down research, and when our students are trying to do research, mostly they download things from the internet, something that happened in Buffalo, New York, or in Canada, or in UK. But our country or our continent or our region is actually fertile ground for research. And only when you can research your own problems and locally own easily accessible research, you can do it, then you understand your problems. We wouldn't be able to talk about trauma and say trauma is only maybe if you're alcoholic or this and that. No, trauma, we have trauma. So when somebody wants to understand this, one might think why, or what are the sources of trauma? What Africa's appetitive aggression? We see whatever the reason is, maybe in our past history, colonization that has divided, raped us and conquered us and took our resources, took our human capital. Maybe that is the case. And then after the independence, we continue on that model because we learn from our colonization and also the institutions that was available at the time, whatever that might be, it's something we need to research. What is it? Is it weak institutions? Is it fragile legal institutions? Is it weak governance? Or maybe we have transgenerational trauma. Of course, we know war, conflict, inequity abound in Africa everywhere. Especially this region has more than its share of all these things: war, conflict, internal displacement. Of course, some regions, some countries are more than others, but we do have, this is, I will say, as an economist, this could be a stylized fact. Of all the traumatization we've been talking about, the irony is we lack, or mental health institutions are lacking. Okay, in the case of Somalia, maybe it's 3. But the amount of massive traumatization and the lack of mental institutions to deal with these problems is another problem. Donor interest. I have to say, I always like to pick on the donors. One thing that the irony is, weapons that we are killing with each other, the weapons of mass destruction that is happening in this region are not produced in these regions, but we are the main consumers of these weapons. Donor interest does not only, it's not only limited to selling weapons to us, and then later trying to tell us that, okay, we need to stop the war. Well, stop the weapons, don't sell it to us, because you're the producer, we're the consumer. Ultimately, we are the one who's bearing the brunt of these weapons. But also our resources are in the interest of donors, of course, geopolitical issues, and of course, Africa is rich of resources that are badly needed. So, and we don't have the strong institutions to protect ourselves, which is to be blamed. We have to blame ourselves. Bad leadership. There was one paper I wrote a while back, and I was actually looking the durability of institutions, or how fragile legal institutions or all institutions are, whether they are legal, economic institutions, all sorts of institutions. Why we have, is there a connection between weak governance and the longevity of the leaders? For some reason, we have produced a lot of bad leaders, and we have more than our share of dictators. So we need to connect. Dictators all bad. How come when if you think about some of the leaders in Africa, really I will challenge the students to do their own research. In the United States, between President Bush, the former one, the father, and the current president, Joe Biden, there may be six or seven presidents that have exchanged hands in the leadership of the United States. We can find and count African leaders that were a president for one African country for that long. You figure. Another thing that might cause issues related to trauma, but really comes from transitional justice issues. And we will link up the transitional justice and trauma healing. Another one is unequal access to commonly owned resources. You know, I'm an economist, so we always say it's all about resources. Most conflicts, it's all about resources. There are commonly owned resources, and I will talk deeper into this later on, but I just want to mention this. All these factors and many more, they're not exhaustive, can cause psychosocial problems. They can also, if it's prolonged, can cause psychiatric syndromes. They can also cause transgenerational trauma, both physical, emotional, and even invisible injuries. So you can think about a population, African population. We have all these sorts of things, and none of this is made up. That's the reality. We have, of course, good things. Not all of them is bad, but we have more than our share of, they say 75% of war, quote unquote, and civil war and mass traumatization is in Africa. So again, man and property, violent death of a parent, witnessing the killing of the close family members, separation and displacement, terror attacks, suicide bombing, kidnapping, life threat, participation in violent acts. You could be a victim or perpetrator. Physical injuries and handicap, clan-based violence, gender-based violence, rape, domestic violence, extreme poverty and starvation, internal displacement, forced eviction due to war, conflict, or election pass. These human violations create massive trauma, which in turn fuel human rights violations and so on. So if you look at the type of trauma that can result from this, can be cognitive, behavioral, invisible injuries, wounds, emotional, depression, anxiety, physical injuries, psychological BTD, lack of self-regulation, substance abuse, family disintegration. And I have to underline family disintegration. Students can compare this now and maybe 30 years ago. Now people are going back to black magic because they're so traumatized, they don't know what's going on. Spirit possession, misplaced sexual appetite, which I think has something to do with the trauma. So these are the kind of things that you look around in your neighborhood, not the rich ones, not the wealthy ones, not the ones who are in power, but a typical normal individual, a citizen, and look what goes on. In Somalia, which had a very prolonged civil war, have a lot of traumatic experience. In fact, they have so many names on mental illness. Now, so I'm getting to the meat of this. Why are we talking about transitional justice and for lasting peace? Most of the things we talked about, the trauma just doesn't happen by itself. Trauma happens because of the transitional justice issues or justice issues or human violation issues or lack of resource sharing issues or political inequity issues, whatever the reason is, we're going to talk about it. The reason Tangaza University and I myself and maybe are trying to collaborate is to create a resource center. Why? What do we need about the center? And that is what we'll actually want this whole program to morph into a center of transitional justice and trauma healing. we need to we can read a book or read an article or read a view or someone's opinion, but the reality is we need evidence based on knowledge creation. Why don't we research our own problems? Why don't we look at why are we taking more share of violence, war, conflict, and so on and so forth? And that's why it's important to have a center that actually come up with this research and actually we can solve our own problems. So when our master students and PhD students from Africa, from East Africa, from the Horn, and they're trying to write their master thesis or they're writing their PhD, they don't just import resources, research from other countries when they have actually fertile ground for research here in their own backyard. So this center, when we plan to do is to become hub for knowledge exchange, interdisciplinary data collection center that addresses the social ills, so transitional justice, economic inequity, gender related violence, and so on and so forth. So that's what the center is. The reason I have decided to kind of give you a taste of what trauma is actually trying to make sure we connect. Why are we doing this? Why Tangaza and myself are interested in, because it's so much needed to have this. And basically the goal is to create this knowledge production center in the future that can actually understand our problems and our plights and hopefully come up with policy implications that can be used by our leaders, by the international communities, by intergovernmental institutions who might send people who have no clue about our realities. So we have to fix our realities, research our realities, do a data collection, and then teach the world that this is what we have. Okay. Again, transitional justice, trauma healing for peace, trauma healing through academic research and production of knowledge. This is what the center is actually planning, and this is what the webinar is gonna actually touch on. But of course, 6 or 7 webinars will not be able to actually do justice to what we plan to do, but it's just to give you, this region is fertile ground for relevant research and knowledge production, whether it's a resource issues, whether it's healing, transitional justice. We talk about transitional justice and war. Where did they originate from? Well, civil war trauma. Why civil war? People fight over power, over resources. There are a lot of economic injustices, political inequities. Who have access to all these resources? Social inequities, I mean, education, health, all sorts of things, prolonged civil war, the presence of IDPs and refugees. We have our own share of all this. So in order for us to understand, the only way we can empower ourselves and understand the root cause of these problems is only through academic research and production of knowledge, and that can become answer to our policymakers, to donors, to anybody who might be interested in understanding why people say, why trauma? It's not because Africans are born to be killers or to create war, but there is a reason that we need to understand. And the only way you can understand this is to understand your situation by using tools and methodology and take it to the next level. Go to your region, go to your locality, go to wherever you want, go to your country, do the research you need to do, and educate people who are trying to educate us for something that's not even relevant and using one size fits all. So we have to understand the multidimensional interdisciplinary approach to trauma and also transitional justice, research on strategy for bringing victims and the victimizers. Don't forget the suicide bombers, the people who are killing our people, the child soldier. All of these are our people. Both the victims and victimizers are our own communities. We need to bring them, we need to heal them, we need to rehabilitate them, we need to integrate them back into the society. So we need to come up, research how to do that. What are the best way to do it? What are the best, our best practices are our own research on judicial system. Are we born to be bad people who have a weak judicial system, or there is something that we need to understand that's causing this? So forth and so forth. Research can also propose truth-telling confidence building or trust building and reconciliation mechanisms. For example, in Somalia, there were at least 14 reconciliation mechanisms for the past many years. And none of them, I believe, has done any regard with mass trauma that has been in Somalia for a long time. So how could you, in fact, what I say is, you have a wound on your hand or on your heart or your body, and you're trying to cover that wound and come up with a false reconciliations without going deeper into the trauma and the reality on the ground. Okay, again, we're talking about how we can use trauma healing through academic research and production of knowledge. First of all, I believe that transition, even though this is an academic research can prove it, which comes first, the transitional injustices or the trauma? I do believe that the trauma comes from transitional justice, because there were times and other countries across the world and over time that didn't have a mass trauma that we have experienced in Africa. So we can look at it, how a research, academic research, or even using production of knowledge, how we can find out what might be causing this mass trauma. So you see all these people who are running away from war or internal displacement and so on and so forth. Well, of course, the transitional justice issue, we need to talk about the social inequities. Okay, look at Africa. Some of we have, even the very meager economy we have, it's very unequal. Access to employment. Who is able to get a good employment? The one who is connected, the one who has relatives in the government, or the poor person who has no connection, but might be an A student and so on and so on. Access to finance. These days, we know finance is very important. Who have access to finance? People don't have collateral or are very poor. Who have access to education, access to healthcare. COVID now, I was actually thinking maybe we could use one of the webinars as COVID traumatization or mass trauma. We have the haves and have-nots in healthcare, in education, in finance, in employment. And that is why people are trying to become decent and dignified. But without access to all of this, they will always be subject to violence or poverty and so on and so forth. All this could cause trauma, and it's not because of the transitional injustices. You can also see political inequities, lack of representation in the government. Who can get into politics? Not everybody. In the case of Somalia now, I will be very frank, women are not sitting on the table where decisions are made. And Somali women bear the brunt of war. Also, they are peace brokers. They're the one who paved the way for men to come together and discuss things. But they unfortunately, they are not signatories of any agreement. And then we have to beg for our representation. And that's a trauma. And that trauma results from the lack of transitional justices. Youth are also similar to us, minorities. I have to commend tonight, I hope he watches Barkhat, there was some guy who was one of the minorities. Almost every Somali was hoping for him to become a parliamentarian in Somaliland. And he became one of them, and we're very proud of him. And we're on the same boat. Youth, minorities, people who have no access, political inequities are a major problem that causes trauma, and it's because of the transitional injustices that is there. Okay, economic inequities are there. What is economic inequity? Because like there is a political inequity, social inequity, resource sharing mechanisms are not there. We say Africa is rich in resources. Unfortunately, we don't have the mechanisms or institutions that can create where these resources, we have plenty, but how can we share that plenty of resources equitably? So at least we don't have people who are so rich from the equally owned resources and people who are so poor. Foreign aid, which I really think that countries that in fact abandoned foreign aid, like Asian tigers, have performed much better and come up with peace, sustainable development, and community cohesion. royalties, national resources, natural, human capital resources. If you saw the picture, this is human capital, the most important resource a country can own, but Africa, what is it? In fact, one of the things that we have, the pictures that I showed at the beginning, is war has changed from the battlefield to urban warfare. So basically now you see more deaths in urban area than the actual war we experienced before in World War II, World War I, and so on and so forth. That's why a lot of people die. If you see recent, both in Kenya, in Somalia, suicide attacks, you know, there's always loss of life. People who have nothing to do with any of that, and they die, and there's a loss of life and property. Now, we have to think about international organizations. I have heard recently, for the past 2 years, that this whole transitional justice has been addressed recently by the UN. But we have been experiencing transitional injustices in Africa that I talked about. And in fact, not only that they failed to think about this and come up with policy, because they are partnering with us, but also they failed to integrate these problems of mass traumatization in Africa. We just don't want to be given food aid. We want a problem solving that can make people stand on their own, have a dignified life, are able to get employment, to have issues of trauma resolved, or even you know, see if we can come up with solutions. Some of the things I wonder when I attended many conferences in Somalia is the lack, all the money that I can think of that has been allocated to Somalia, you will see hardly a good school, a good hospital. And then we say we get all these millions and millions of money. So it's a misplaced also agenda that we need to also question whoever giving us money. And actually most of this money is not free. Later on, you have the death and all that stuff. We need to, I do appreciate whatever they are doing, but we need to also make sure they are accountable to the problems and they can attend to our needs, but only us can communicate with them and do research and say, this is what's going on, this is how we wanted it, and so on and so forth. But you are at the mercy of their own issues. They have their own donor interests. National governments are also important. Regional states are also important. And of course, localities are important. Transitional justice, a lasting peace, a policy perspective. So basically, how can we come up with a holistic approach? First, to trauma healing, one is to understand the transitional justice issues that from the first place have caused these problems. So we need a political will, we need to end cycles of impunity, we need to come up with mechanisms of conflict resolution, conflict management. I hear the UN and all others say silence the gun. How do you silence the gun when the issue of trauma and people who are mass traumatized are there, and it's easy for them to kill or to maim? And also, I actually laugh at this silencing the gun. It's true, it's good to silence the gun, but there are other mechanisms and ways to heal the people before you even give them a policy that's just there out there for as a name, but not as a mechanism to help the mass traumatization caused by transitional justice issues. We need accountable, transparent policies, governments. We need accountable, transparent international community donors. We need a strong rule of law, respect for human rights. We need inclusive policies. And it has to be context specific, because you can't bring, as I said before, one size fits all. So this needs a partnership from the international community, but with the right policy. And it's us to expect to give them the resources they need, the research they need, so we can, you can't just give the wrong medicine if you really don't know what the disease is. So we have to understand our diseases, we have to understand our problems, we have to understand and do our own research. That's why Center for Trauma Healing and Transitional Justice, from research perspective, that research will be leading to policy making and implementation of what is needed and the reality on the ground. We need responsible, accountable, and effective sovereign government who attends the need of the welfare of their citizens. Even if they are against you, you still are responsible. And that is what Africa lacks. Either you are with me or you are with the evil. It's common to all. But we have to understand what we're dealing with is common understanding, forgiving and caring for your citizens. And that's what qualifies a better government, effective government, a government that cares its population. Population are not rotting in refugee camps, and two countries are always fighting. Like the Dadaab now, should the refugees go after 20, 30 years, where do they belong to? They belong to Kenya, and they're still in camps, and they suffer with no sanitation, with all these diseases and problems. Or they belong to Somalia. Whatever that is, we are dealing with human capital. That's African human capital. That's East African human capital that suffer and struggle, and who is to be blamed for. We need post-conflict economic reconstruction. I think it's all about resources, but we need to manage those resources so they are inclusive, equitable. We need to reduce unemployment for our youth. These are our promises, not our problem. They are our potential. Again, dealing with mass trauma, again, a policy perspective. This specifically is for trauma healing. The first slide we just now finished has to deal with transitional justice. We can use money forms, internalize faith-based tools to trauma healing. And I think that's why Tangaza is going to be very useful, because you can look at different religion and look at all these people, the death, the destruction, the trauma that we experience, and how we can deal with using faith. I'm not sure about the culture, because some of the culture is good, but some culture actually promotes violence and actually causes further traumatizing population. Break the stigma. If somebody has a mental illness, or if they have, even I remember when you have COVID, people were not telling others that they had COVID because of the stigma. And we need to break the numbing cycle of trauma. We need to provide opportunity for people who are traumatized to be able to heal. And what is that healing process? Attend to their massive health needs. And these are all research that needs to be done. In fact, it's very funny that we have, very ironic, that we have a lot of traumatized population with all this massive trauma, but we don't have mental health facilities, programs and services, school counseling. If you go to the United States and a child comes to school one morning and that child is acting up, here in our culture, we beat them, or we say, oh, he's spoiled. Over there, they send that child to a counselor who can ask, what is it? Did that person eat breakfast? Is there a problem at home? What's going on? So we need to, in fact, given all the trauma we have, we need to have programs, and our schools must reflect and do counseling. There are also mental or clinical trauma, which the doctors and hospitals can attend to that. Effective reconciliation process, which I don't think we had, because we have to understand our culture, our religion, our border issues, our problems. And as I said before, for us to be able to come up with effective reconciliation, the reality on the ground must be addressed and studied, and then we can come up with who is going to do this and that. One size fits all doesn't fit our region. Trauma healing, actually, then I will get back. This is a preliminary results of a survey we actually survey we conducted in Puntland in 2016 and 2017, when we first launched this whole program of transitional justice and trauma healing. And this is what the people said. This is not a theory, this is the reality. Majority of the people stated, of course, this was in Somalia, the civil war trauma is extremely the most traumatic experience. Also, they mentioned societal structural inequities, discrimination, social, economical, and political. All of this was there. Poverty was another problem. Unemployment is also another problem. Almost 70% of the youth of that region were not employed. failed migration, which has cost a lot of mothers to their resources because the youth are unemployed and they say they will go and look for opportunities outside. They have to sell whatever meager resources they have, be a car or a house or a gold or whatever the mother may have. That's common in Africa, in East Africa particularly. Well, high employment is chasing young, our human capital, whether they are educated or whether they're not, leaving them, and then actually some of them don't even make it. As I said, while they look for opportunity, they find death in the high seas. We have IDPs. They actually have we have included IDPs and refugees, and actually most of them were these were the problems. A failed migration, youth having problems with employment. Also, people want to go back to their homes. Some of these IDPs were in that area, and they were tired of being in camps and wanted to go back and have go back to their farm or their livelihoods before the war. Also, gender-based violence were common. FGM, female genital mutilation, was common, so that was part of the results we got. Rape, which is very common now, it's very funny. Rape, in fact, it's very tragic that we experience a lot of these problems, especially of late now in Somalia. People killing each other in a wrong way or even mutilating human body, and it's very tragic, and I can't explain that. Just say the people are becoming animals. It's just a massive trauma that hasn't been addressed in our homeland. Also, they actually propose some solutions, faith-based, prevention of trauma and addressing transitional justice issues, enforce policies and rule of law, strong rule of law. Now, one of the issues of transitional justice that we have asked was the multiple legal systems that sometimes can help or hurt. Like, there is a case that I want to explain. There was a rape. A woman was raped by 6 men, and you can either go to Sharia or go to clan chiefs, or you can go to the government. And at times, most of these multiple legal systems can cause harm to the victims. So we need to address these multiple legal systems or justices and find out how we can address that in a research, in the research center. Okay. Again, I will not kind of build this, but you can see dealing with transitional justice and trauma healing is a communal thing. It takes a village to help this. It involves traditional leaders. It involves citizens. They have to based on nationhood, a common identity. We've seen in Africa, we have lost a common citizenship because, you know, you either with the opposition or with the government, and it's always this chasing among each other. Rehabilitation of our perpetrators. This is rehabilitation needs to be, and the reintegration of these victimizers into the community, meaning that we have to come up with a solution so these people can be integrated to the community, so they're not harmful and create more mayhem. Government, as I said before, to build a transparent, accountable institutions. Media, which this is all the study we got from the students. Media polarizes and ignites hate or division or causes more problems. So we need to train our media people to be professional, to also not to ignite hate when in fact they can ignite love. They have to be responsible, and they have to be sensible, and they have to have education to be able not to create division, but unite. Also, we talk about business responsibility. They were talking about that. It came all out of the research. Companies are coming, they're just making profit very quickly, but they have no responsibility in terms of corporate social responsibility. And most governments are not aware, or they're not accountable to anyone. Or building ethical business behavior. Some of the things we found during that process was that people were selling expired products, And there is no, of course, it's a failed state in Somalia, and any region now, they import all the food, and some of this food is very harmful for people who are consuming it, but people have become also, when it's not regulated, profit is at times okay. We can't say we want to go back to the socialism. Profit making is okay, but profit making without regulation is harmful to the people, and that's what happens in the case of Somalia, where you see. What happened here? I think I have finished my presentation. I don't know if anybody is around.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Hoden, for this elaborate presentation, transitional justice and trauma healing. There have been many good points you have raised, some touching on research, some on your own personal experience, and some coming from the Puntland. And the last points you gave us, finding from the Puntland State University, were very telling and helping us also reflect how to conduct research in this particular area. But some of these points are areas that are very common to us in the region. For example, civil war, which is the highest contributor to trauma, structural inequalities, youth unemployment, and something very touch on failed migration and failed hope, especially when the youth want to leave their countries and cross over the seas to Europe, and then they drown. The whole question of domestic violence, and then this very serious case on rape. So the question that you are asking is, what can we do together to promote transitional justice and reduce trauma within our communities, within our society? And you've also given us a model how traditional leaders can take responsibility, the government can take responsibility, the media, the business, the citizen, and all of us. So when we go through this kind of a lecture, this presentation, then what can we carry home so that we can become the transformers of our own societies and the environment we live in? So right now, we want to open up to questions and discussions. If there are questions on the floor, we would like to share. There was a question if somebody is an expert in the area of the Gacaca courts and how they've gone about promoting transitional justice and trauma healing in Rwanda. Maybe somebody can share on that. But the questions can be direct to Professor. She's here. She's given us quite a lot of clarification points that can help us engage with you right now.
The question is about Rwanda?
The Rwanda, and if there are similar models of traditional mechanisms of trauma healing, transitional justice and trauma healing. We know we have had also truth and reconciliation in South Africa, but can we have such courts within our own region, within our own societies, within our own communities? Any comment on that, Professor? Go ahead.
Okay, well, Rwanda, in my opinion, yes, it went through a very bad civil war very quickly, and it had to do with also a lot of social inequities, economic inequities. Some felt like others were having more. So eventually that morphed into a problem of a full-blown civil war that they have caused, maimed, killed, and commit atrocity against their own people. The good news about Rwanda is it went on, the intensity was a lot, but it didn't extend it the long time. It wasn't the same as Somalia, which has experienced also same issues. It wasn't as bad as Rwanda, but it went on for a long time. One of the main things, I think the world looked differently to Rwanda, and some of the issues of reconciliation was very quick and timely. On the other hand, issue of trauma is being addressed somewhat. other than, in fact, if there is any country, a good model is the way Rwanda handled, but this, and it's relatively more intense and better, but the issue is still out there. The resources are not enough, but I think the government made a priority to underline and make sure that this issue is not, it's not like a wound that you cover that wound. In fact, they expose that wound. It make it, it's actually, in fact, I was reading a woman who has her husband killed all her family in Rwanda, and she still lives with that trauma. But there were attempts by some intergovernmental institutions and also the government and also religious groups were very generous to Rwanda, in my opinion. And I guess things are moving on, but we can learn from Rwanda model because we are very similar and some of these things we share. But I think it is bigger than Rwanda. Rwanda still needs a lot of reconciliation and dealing with the massive trauma, but I think they are on their way to much better, relatively much better, compared to South Sudan, to Somalia, to even Ethiopia now, which you can see they were doing very well, but then the recent violence in some of the regions is causing more problems. So I think there is a model. It's better to learn from our own region and our own people. Context specific is important, but imagine each country is also, even though it's all in the Horn, in the East Africa, but each country, some of it is caused by territory and resources. Some of it is caused by election impasse. In the case of Kenya in 2007, where I heard 18 million were actually traumatized and misplaced. It's different in Ethiopia now, which might have a territory and resources. South Sudan, which actually broke away from Sudan, and now they're having the same issue they had before. So this is a classic case of finding what the problem is in Africa, in East Africa, and maybe there might be some stylized facts. There might be something to learn from Sudan, from Rwanda, from all this. But I think Rwanda is a good model for dealing with trauma, unlike Somalia, absolutely.
Thank you very much. And then the follow-up question is about clan democracy. We find this in Somalia, clan democracy. So how do we deal with the question of clanism in Somalia? And even in Kenya, some parts of Kenya, we have the dominant clan takes it all, and then the other clans are suffering. So it causes a lot of trauma. So how do you deal with this clanism and clan democracy in Somalia?
There's no clan democracy. Clan kills. When people have a common ground and common identity. I grew up during Siad Barre, and I remember very vaguely that Siad Barre, I mean, some people think that, you know, Siad Barre was bad, but there are a lot of good things I remember during that time, especially when he buried the clan. He actually, every region, they created some sort of a picture and they dig a hole and they put the clan in. There was a period of time where clan was silenced in a way. And it became actually a big problem, the complexity of clan. It's very complex. I understand tribes and clans and ethnicity in Africa is terrible. But in Somalia, yes, we have come up with a program called 4.5, where clans can, it's not a clan democracy. I think that maybe the people who came up with that policy did have good intentions, but it has actually become the problem in terms of my belief and my research. It has become a problem for Somalia because not only it's clan now we are having problems. There's a resource issue, there's a self-interest issue. So, and also the ugliness of 4.5, the way the clans share resources or political power is ugly because they say 4 clans are big and another clan is 0.5, half. By itself, it's already not equitable, it's not fair, and it's very ugly. And it has actually brought Somalia, I think, one of the reasons of sharing resources to clan It's a big problem, because even if now there's really not much of a clanism, there is a religious differences. Now the people are having all this cult behavior. There are regions now in Somalia, mostly based on everybody went back after Mogadishu failed after the civil war. Everybody went back to their own regions. Of course, they are based on clan, and each region is now trying to come up with a way to build a country that's based on national cohesion, national allegiance, common identity, and cohesion. It's very hard to build after you have this prolonged war that has that created a lot of mass trauma. So I think in Somalia, it's not about the clan. It might be now it's about resources and political power. And who have access to these resources can in fact use the clan, but it's not about clan. The people who are coming together, most of them are not based on clan. That's number one. The fact that resource sharing is based on clan can create more division among people. So you can, the fact that all human capital now, because the arrangement, the power sharing is based on 4.5, maybe somebody who has better education, has much better work ethics, moral ground, might not be able to get a job because of that whole 4.5. So if you ask me 4.5 and the clan democracy, there's no such a thing in Somalia as clan democracy. Clan dominates and it actually killed the country. And unless we come up with some sort of sovereign government that's based on common identity and takes care of the welfare of its citizens commonly, not based on clan, might one day help Somalia. So anybody who's thinking about clan being a clan democracy is actually not. Somalia could be, can be a good example of failed state, and they're trying to share resources and power through clan. It will never be successful.
Yeah, so it means one vote, one man, one vote democracy may not work in Somalia. So the second,
one man, I want to correct. I want to correct you. One person, one vote will help, because now with the 4.5 allocation and the parliamentary system we have, only few people, or maybe 300 people choose the president. Not any single. If we had a one person, one vote, that it happened when Somalia has the top democracy in Africa. In fact, we were trying to get into that, but it didn't happen. Also, this election now that they're trying to come up with in 60 days, is not going to be one person, one vote. One person, one vote is a viable political model. But we don't have that right now. It will be the same 4.5 indirect election. Sadly, that will be the model for the next election, which will cause a lot of problems and corruption and political favors.
Yeah, mental health. This is another question about mental health. Is an area that is not very much looked into, because even our cultures do not respect people with mental challenges. So how do we handle or improve facilities that deal with mental health in our region?
Well, that's a very good, all of the questions are good. Mental health is a very important, and our people need that based on what we saw, all the problems and everywhere. You know, it's a stigma. Even in Somalia, it's a stigma that you can't talk about issues of mental health. But mental health is something that scientific, if people are suffering from all sorts of inequities, political inequities, social income, or even health-wise, we need to create the facilities. In fact, Africa has a lot of transgenerational trauma. Even though we shouldn't linger what happened in division of Africa, but also there are things that has been building up during the dictatorship, state ownership, and now we're trying to get into democracy, countries coming to us and dividing us. Even now, issues of donor interests, which is still divide and rule and conquer, people are traumatized. So there are all sorts of trauma, as I speak about. We need the facilities. We need to cure the mass trauma of our human capital. If you are a young, our youth are traumatized because they finish high school, they finish college, and they are not able even to get a decent job. Our women are traumatized for on many fronts. So people will look into other issues, and you can re-traumatize. We need to address that issue. The only way to address is to have a policy directed to create mental health institutions where people are not stigmatized, where there is, instead of having a lot of political, in fact, if citizens are to question their political leaders' ambition and what they can do for you, mental health institutions are much needed, and we are in dire need of having this in every corner of our region. Because of the trauma, because of the civil war, because of internal displacement, because of political inequities, because you feel you are a citizen of a country and you have no access to anything. You feel, and it's been generational also trauma among ourselves. There are clans that are more dominant. There are people who are more dominant. There are ones who are actually taking all the resources that are owned together, commonly owned resources. There are people who have access to foreign aid and they can do whatever they want to do. These are all trauma, whether it's unemployment, whether it's economic. So I think to cure that and to come up with a long-term solution for our population, so we will not become a traumatized population who just keep going on. It will have long-term effects. Mental health institutions must be built, must be prioritized by government institutions, and must address the mass traumatization we have, whether it's mental, psychological, and invisible wounds, war trauma, IDPs, refugees, or even, you know, in a rural area where nobody knows what's going on.
Yeah, this question is about women. Women are the most affected by situations that create trauma, yet population-wise, they are the majority. How do we tap into this power to liberate them? That's a question.
As I said, yes, this is true. Women are the ones who bear the brunt of war. They're the one who raise the family, raise the kids, attend the elderly. Now, other responsibility is they are the breadwinners. It was in the US that they used to talk about female-headed family. In fact, if you take a survey of Kenya, Somalia, Ethiopia, most of those who struggle, you see having a petty trade, standing on the roads and trying to sell, they are the ones who are women. On the other hand, also, they're the one who actually face most of the atrocities, whether it's all the violence, whether it's rape or whether it's domestic violence, all sorts of things. They can't set policies. I can attest to the reality of Somali women. I mean, and I'm sure I have seen many Kenyan women for the past few years have been around. It's very similar. So they're not signatories of anything, and they're not sitting on the decision-making table in Somalia on one hand. I know Kenya have a very powerful woman, like Somalia, like Ethiopia, like anywhere. But without having access to the decision-making table and advancing the issues that are particular to women, whether it's a lack of political access, lack of economic resources. I mean, look at how many wealthy Kenyans, Somalians. You will not find Somali woman or Kenyan woman who is so wealthy. And of course, money resources, very important. Even when you're trying to get into the decision-making seat, you need resources. So women must come together, understand their realities, but without policy, in fact, targeted gender policy and affirmative action toward women and youth. And imagine women and youth in Africa, in East Africa, in Horn of Africa, constitute more than 75% of the population. So even the policymakers who are men, who are in power, if they not attend to that percent, that means you're gonna have lost generations. And not only the massive trauma, will be massive unemployment, and we will all suffer. So I think it's time women to organize themselves, youth to organize themselves and demand their rights, and also the leaders and the government to come up with sound policies that are inclusive, because women and youth are also part of the government.
Yeah, and in one of the points you raised to reduce trauma was a holistic approach, and you brought out some good points here: political will, you know, impunity, post-conflict, economic reconciliation, in the aspect of faith. So how do we tap into different faith practices to support trauma healing?
Well, in fact, the faith is needed because some of these issues, some of them are not medical. Some of them are just healing and understanding faith. So faith can actually play an important role in bringing back the reality of living human being and trying to make sense of what's going on. So in the case of, like, for example, Islam, which I can speak to, basic human right and freedom of women from violence is enshrined in our faith. And I'm sure many have been part of a lot of interfaith in the US. We can use that to, even though some people will say religion can be also very aggressive and violent and all that stuff, but we can also come up with a faith-based solutions in healing people. I do believe faith can heal people, but faith alone cannot help. So I think it could become part. Faith is part of the community, like the government, like the intergovernmental agencies. And I think that's why it's holistic approach. You need the healing from accountable and transparent, effective government who can set policies that have maybe institutions, specific institutions to deal with this trauma. You can have the churches and the mosques and the synagogues and wherever that might be to also think about, this has to be identified. Trauma has to be identified. When you hear trauma and the source of trauma and what heals trauma from your church, from your mosque, from your institution, religious institution, then you might have a basic understanding of it and might even be provided healing. Yeah. So I think it's very important to take, I do believe some of the resilience that help a lot of the impacted people in Somalia is the fact that they were faithful, and some of them were internalizing that faith value, and in that sense, people are more resilient. That doesn't mean that we should address the issue of trauma and leave it to the religion or to their faith. We need to aggressively find solutions through effective government solutions. And then, of course, it will become holistic when international community are part of it. Now, if you look at international community, I think I heard maybe it was something in 2020 that people were talking about mental issues or massive trauma in Africa. Where were they? There's been a civil war in Africa for 30, 40 years. We have maimed ourselves, we kill ourselves through resources, through elections, through all sorts of things. And we need, now they're thinking about, okay, well, maybe we have a mass traumatization people, how can we heal it? And it's even, that is actually, I think, is a lip service. And unless our students, our PhD students, our master students address this issue, whether they look at the holistic approach to trauma or look at any of these things I have provided to look at it, the effect of accountability and transparency, the effect of international community, accountable policy, post-conflict economic reconstruction will definitely reduce poverty. Poverty is a traumatizing issue. So I think faith is very important, not by itself, but along with all the other factors that I have described.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's very interesting discussion. and we realize time is always our enemy. But you have raised very important questions, which we can carry on in the next. So we're very sorry we have to come to the end of this webinar, and I would like to call upon Susan Gear to give the closing remarks. Susan.
Yes. Hello. I hope everyone can hear me. So first of all, my name is Susan Gier. I'm junior advisor at the IRDIS team, and I coordinated the steering group for this webinar. So I just wanted to use this opportunity to thank first and foremost Professor Hoda and Isse as the initiator of this webinar series for this thought-provoking and fruitful input. I think it lays a good foundation for our upcoming webinars. So following that, the next webinar, which examines particularly the role of gender and in transitional justice and trauma healing. So directly referring to the question we also, which has been raised today, will be held on the 8th of July. So we are looking forward to this journey and hope to welcome all of you again. In addition to that, I would like to thank Sister Agnes, Beatrice Churu, and Father Adrian for the welcoming words, and particularly Reginald Nalugala for the moderation. So as well as the whole team of SAS, IRDIS, and the Tangaza Marketing Department, who all put their efforts in this webinar. So particularly we want to thank all of you, particularly for your participation, and particularly the questions and comments you raised. So lastly, we would really like highly appreciate your feedback. So there are several options to do that. So you can either participate in a small 5-minute survey. So therefore you just need to scan the QR code or link that has been, that you can see here in the PowerPoint. Otherwise, you're more than welcome to write us your feedback via email. You can do that to Evelyn, who's the administrator of SAS. So once again, I would like to thank all of you and wish you a wonderful evening.
So thank you very much, Susan, for those closing remarks. We have been following a webinar unpacking trauma, transitional justice, and trauma healing. This is organized by Tangaza University College, Interreligious Dialogue and Islamic Studies, in collaboration with Puntland State University through Professor Hodan. We thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you on the 8th of July at a similar time. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.